clear stream from you. So our first question come from Alejandra Recalard, excuse me for the name pronunciation, who I believe works at Free the Bears in Laos. She asked, or they asked, I should say, is it possible to raise awareness within those sanctuaries, which they're making a great effort to rescue wildlife, but at the same time encouraging unethical tourism by promoting selfies with wildlife? To provide a quick example on the side of this, I've often heard sanctuaries say that they will get far more interaction on a post, or they will get far more donations come in if they have a staff member holding or interacting with an animal compared to when they post a picture of an animal alone. So do you think it's possible to raise good awareness, and what are some of the strategies that we could use? Inge, we might start with you.
All right. Well, I think it's actually quite interesting because what we see with Cikananga and Wanicare is that we get the most hits with very sad story / photo. It doesn't need to be a person there. So if you have, sorry to say, a rather shocking photo with the right story to it, I think you can create a lot of awareness as well. That's our experience. We don't post the photos with people.
And have you experienced the same thing in Wildlife Rescue Center Jogja?
Yeah, for some of our volunteers and also some interns may sometimes take a picture of their self with the wildlife years ago, and then we kind of sorted out making some kind of a guideline for those kind of activities. Like, for example, we have the volunteer guideline and internship guideline stating that it is not allowed to take a picture together with the wildlife, and even it's not allowed to post the picture, anything related to whatever in our center, to the public without our concern.
Yeah. And Anna, you have worked a lot with seeing social media images and people with animals online. Do you find it possible that we can deliver a different way of raising awareness in sanctuaries and rescue centers and needing to interact with wildlife?
Well, I think one of another key point is that a lot of sanctuary workers do interact with wildlife, and this concept of the context is really important. And so I was in a really huge workshop with zookeepers that do either visitor experiences with ambassador animals, or who had photographs of themselves in a veterinary context, etc. So I think if it's a clear professional veterinary context where the gloves or PPE or whatever is needed is worn, and ideally the photograph is watermarked or has a context like an @ tag on it where someone could go to the account in a place where it can't be removed easily. I think there is a place where we call them animal 2 shots, where there's a person in shot with the animal. I've worked a lot with the BBC, and they always want to put in a 2 shot. And they say it's also in the moment in that film, in a BBC film, the public want to see the presenter in context with an animal. We had a speaker, Ben Garrett, who does a lot of, just did a whole television, series about chimpanzee sanctuaries. And he argued as well that him being a professional in context with the chimpanzees has brought in a huge amount of fundraising to that sanctuary. But it's contextualized. If it was just anyone, if it was a famous Hollywood actor, it would be different. So we as professionals, if we use 2 shots for the help of our sanctuary in as professional a way as we can, almost going over the top with all the PPE, like this is how you handle an animal, I think that would be as educational as avoiding it altogether, because we do have to handle the animals. So I see, but having a volunteer going up with a silly 2 shot, that's very different. And we have the same rules in our project as well of not posting those kind of photographs. But I think we've gotten really extreme because there is a place and people do like those photographs more. So making them as educational as possible would be my suggestion, and providing a message about what you're doing, the health check you're doing or whatever.
And Sarah, I believe, is it correct that wild welfare also has an aspect of working with tourism companies to promote animal welfare? Was that right? You had a relationship with one company. Have you found they, do you have a policy about this, or do you have information about this for those organizations you work with in tourism about photos and interacting with animals?
So at the moment, the relationships that we have with the tourism companies, it's more speaking about animal welfare as a whole. You know, if you are looking at particular distances between certain wildlife that you might be viewing, or making sure that you know, the sanctuaries that you might be visiting aren't pseudo sanctuaries and that kind of thing. So that's more where we're going on that front. But we do a lot of training with the companies themselves to make sure that they can understand animal welfare as a whole better. So that is something that we could certainly bring up with them. But I think what Anna was saying was really important. Obviously, they with context, they do have a use, and we find it as well with our social media and that kind of thing. People really do want to see us out there working with them, with the animals. But I think, and I've had this conversation a lot with zoos, is we do work with animals and we want to show it off. So we might, you know, our profile picture might be us with an animal, but then you've got so many people who don't have the opportunity going, oh, well, I want that picture too. I'm going to go out and find that. And that's where we get the unethical situations. And again, it might be through naivety, it might be through other things. But if we have that show of solidarity, and so many people that I've spoken to now who do work with animals, you wouldn't actually be able to tell from their profiles, their social media presence, because they don't actually show photos of them working with animals. And it can be really difficult because you do want to show it off, you do want to be like, hey, I do this really cool thing. But if we are making the situation worse, and again, for rescue centers, that might mean that eventually more animals come into their care through, you know, the selfie industry and that kind of thing, then it's showing that solidarity and making that wider awareness. And also, I guess, in a sense, calling people out on it as well. If we can make everybody aware of what this one photo might be doing overall. I've had several kind of arguments with friends almost, in saying, you know, this seems like just an innocent share of a photo, but actually looking at that wider picture, it can have so many implications.
Well, that's absolutely correct in terms of, you know, maybe those who are in the Western world and working in a professional facility like a zoo or something like that, interacting with an animal in your care. If that message goes to somewhere else in the world, the Middle East or Southeast Asia, for instance, it's actually very easy to go to a market and find one of those animals and replicate that yourself. So the way that we present ourselves in this industry and in rescue centers, etc., is very important. And I believe for anyone who's interested, Brooke might have to correct me here, but the IUCN Small Ape Specialist Group actually has guidelines for captive animal facilities in how to excuse me, I've lost for words, how to create good messages on social media about interactions with animals.
Yeah, it's the human primate interactions section, but yes.
There we go. Thank you very much, Brooke. Okay, so our next question is a bit of a broad one, and you can interpret it however you want. We have talked a lot about the challenges for sanctuaries and rescue centers, and you've touched on in your presentations, but what are the biggest obstacles in your view, maybe the top three, to SARCs being able to meet the challenges of wildlife welfare and conservation? Sarah, what do you think from your experience working in Asia?
Well, obviously, I think from what my talk was about, professional development is a massive one. I mean, I've spoken to people who, I think in Vietnam just a few years ago when I was out there, they didn't actually have a Vietnamese phrase for animal welfare. So even understanding it without even a definition of it and a word for it in Vietnamese is quite difficult. So dealing with some of those issues and bringing people up into really that compassionate, empathetic approach, but using that science and making that science accessible. So yeah, I still think that, yeah, capacity building in that sense is definitely the biggest one. But I think that everybody else has probably got even more experience in sanctuaries that might be able to offer more insight.
And Inge, from your experiences, what are the biggest challenges that you come across in your career in the last 10 years?
Yeah, a number. I would say resources for sure, and then I know we're talking about financial, but it's staff, it's everything that has to do with being able to do what you want to do, and also capacity for sure, and support system. So what I see is people on the front lines are immensely dedicated, and they give 100% every single time. And it's sometimes a bit underestimated how much that asks from a person, from a team. So I see that a lot as well, that this is something that really needs attention sometimes to support the individual, but also the center. But individual, it needs attention as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think, what do they term it? Compassion fatigue often to support people, because I think everyone here in their work, and many of those joining on Zoom today, will have seen some pretty horrendous situations in their life. And for a bunch of very compassionate and empathetic conservationists and people concerned about animal welfare, I know personally it's taken a huge toll sometimes seeing these things. And Anna, I guess you'd agree, considering your research, that would be a struggle for people.
And I think also the concept of animal welfare not being present in some of these places, but also when an animal dies, we can feel that, you know, the loss. So we've just done a recent study on Western zoos and management's how management don't want to provide bereavement leave when an animal that someone's been caring for a long time dies. So in addition to all of the other struggles and mental health issues, you really care for these animals and you see them dying, and you're supposed to stay strong all the time. And I think that's something that's a very difficult issue for people to talk about, but also at the same time, maybe working in a culture where no one else is feeling that empathy for that animal. So then you and 2 or 3 colleagues are alone and feeling the empathy and sadness when those animals die. So I think that's also very, very important, and recognizing, you know, someone who does commit, like Inge being in Cikananga for 10 years, that's a huge amount of commitment. And it's just as an example, because I've worked with her a lot. I know how difficult that can be. And I think a lot of they go, oh, you have this cool job, you're working, blah, blah, blah. And they don't realize what you've given up and how low the salaries are. And some people feel guilty taking a salary for this work, and I think that's something else, that conservationists deserve a salary. And more of the funders need to realize that as well, because it's one of the hardest things to fundraise for is salaries and paying people what they deserve to do this really difficult work.
And that's, yeah, absolutely true. Having been in many of those positions myself, it's a challenge being away from family, being away from friends. Often, I know in Inge's case, for many years there was very little internet at Cikananga, and so you tend to rely on your family, on your work colleagues, which can also be a real challenge. And Erna, what's it like in your center, in terms of your staff and how they feel and mental health?
Well, yeah, that's also, yeah, I agree that mental health is really, we should acknowledge that as a top priority, I think, because we many times feel the return, I mean, the people come and go quite fast, because not many of them can really put their time a lot in this kind of work if not really passionate about the animals, I think. And also I agree to Anna saying that yeah, we do a great job, but often it's just the most difficult thing to fundraise for the salary of the staff itself. So back again, it's resource is the major barrier for our work, and also the political reality as well sometimes could exacerbate everything, because like we all know that we have done many things we can for the animals, but sometimes we need to, you know, I don't know, maybe the authority could have more work, or they have some kind of system to reporting that the information, the relay of information cannot be done really quickly. But yeah, in the fact that we need to make a quick decision in the field a lot, many times, and accepting that kind of a response from the authority, it's quite devastating. And that's where we need a support from many of our colleagues at the time. And yeah, for me, it's quite rewarding to work in this place because we have like a comfort place for everybody to work with such a passion.
Yeah, you're right. And I think you raised a very interesting point again there, is that whilst we are all passionate conservationists, empathetic towards animal welfare, maybe stakeholders in particular have a different, say such as governments, have a different perception of it, and it can be really difficult to navigate that situation when you are so intensely passionate and got that fire in you about that. I'm really happy that that was actually raised today as one of the biggest challenges in SARCs is mental health and compassion fatigue, because it is something I've personally seen repeated many, many, many times. And it's great to hear that there is the want to support each other here. And hopefully that's something we're going to develop, not necessarily on the mental health side of things, but to create a forum. For instance, we want to create a subgroup where people across Indonesia can actually talk to each other, and whether that be issues about the struggles that you're having personally, or it can be also about what's happening in your region. A few of you alluded to, there's many regional differences across Indonesia to how people work with the authorities and what the authorities do. So that's something that we're hoping to develop, and many of you will actually hear about next month as we plan that. Yeah, hopefully. Let's see how it goes. I just want to create an open forum where anything can be brought up just to update each other. I think that particularly in Indonesia, everyone knows each other, and it's understandable across rescue centers everywhere, as everyone knows their network, everyone knows everyone by name. But to actually be able to sit down and chat and actually get an update from people rather than just in passing when you're picking up an animal or you happen to be at a conference. So hopefully we can provide that forum at Asia for animals for everyone to connect. On to our next question is, how often in your Sanctuary Rescue Center, we asked this to Irhamna before, how often in your Sanctuary Rescue Center do you feel you need to make compromises to your activities due to lack of resources that may impact conservation and welfare? And how do you make those hard choices? What are some of the things that cannot be compromised on? And what are some of the things that you have compromised on? Is there a middle ground or a minimum benchmark with requirements and things that you do not compromise on? Sorry, I should select someone first, shouldn't I? Anna, you can take that one on first.
Well, yeah, I have raised that before, that we have, because of the resource constraints, financial constraints and anything, we need to compromise with many things, of course, including providing facility for animals, because we never know. It is quite unpredictable on what numbers and what kind of species that may come to our side. And then we need to compromise, like, for example, if we have upper capacity already in the quarantine, for example, then we would just make something quite similar to the quarantine, like improvise more in the field without losing the substance or losing the essential of each purpose of the work. That's what we're trying to do. And that also the case where we don't have lots of space anymore for the animals. We would just try to communicate that to the government, like, really sorry, we don't have enough capacity and this may exacerbate the condition of the animals. Would you please just send, or how can I help you to reach out other organizations willing to accept those kind of the animals? That's the least we can do, at least.
And how receptive are governments to that? I know in some experiences that if you refuse a government agency once off, that they do not want to, they just won't call you again for the next time, and they'll just release the animal or just not bother with it. Do you find you've had experiences like that?
Well, yeah, many times we are rejected to accept the animals, and then it's quite lucky that here we have quite many facilities, not rescue center, but at least facility like the breeding center, I think, and also the zoo to accommodate the animals as well. But this is also the point, and the important point is not every facility have the ability to make a decision, to make a future planning towards the animals, especially those that are still releasable. So that's also the thing that we try to keep speaking towards the government as well, that I think increasing the capacity of the government staff itself in terms of how to make a scoring system quite feasible in the field, making a decision about how and which animals that can be still released, they should be sent to the proper place to be able to be released, and then which animals that are unreleasable.
Yeah, absolutely. And Inge, I believe you would have some of the same challenges at Cikananga. Cikananga is a very big center with many, many animals. And whilst the primary, you might be used as hopefully just a temporary holding facility, you end up getting animals that are essentially in sanctuary at your rescue center, such as, orangutans that take a lot of resources. How have you in the past made compromises to the activities that you have undertaken at Cikananga to try and essentially balance the budget and achieve as much as you can?
Yeah, I would say you compromise on daily basis, because there are so many layers in the center where you have to do compromises. Like diet, for example, during the COVID, this was a big thing. We didn't have enough resources to buy nectar or gum for some specialized diets. So we had to say, okay, we have to accept that we do our best, but at this moment we have to do it with less than we want. For enclosures, like maintenance, you sometimes make the decision to do it less good than you want, just to make sure that it's still usable. Staff, but you don't have enough staff, which means you don't have enough time per animal. There are compromises on so many levels, also on releases and intake. How do we balance it? We look at the options and we take the best route, and also trying to think ahead. Like with the diets of COVID, it was an informed decision, as in we don't know how long the situation is going to last, and we know that we have kept animals alive on a less ideal diet before, so that's where you're going to pick off what's possible, although with not that you want to, but that's how you're going to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just had another a comment in the chat from Felicity Oram. She said that she thinks the work to increase the capacity of government staff is critical, but quite sensitive and important work. In going on that comment, what are some of the strategies that you guys have used or seen in your time to increase the capacity or the understanding of government? Anna touched on that before, but has anyone else had experience with good strategies they've been able to implement? Inge, have you had any?
Well, what we do, like Anna also said, like making a connection with your local forestry department, local government staff. And what we did is actually inviting them every single time when we do something and taking them along into the steps. And that's how we not only show them how we work, but also you get that personal connection and just put time into it. It can be sensitive work, but showing them the challenges you face on a daily basis and discussing these topics actually does wonders sometimes, even with the people you don't expect it.
Yeah. We have a specific question for Sarah now. How do you find the enrichment roadmap works when you may leave a facility? So you've gone in, you've explained it, everyone gets super excited about it and wants to implement it in their daily lives. But then people get very busy, they get stuck into their duties, and it doesn't often get fully implemented in a place. What have you done to ensure or that this can be something that's front of mind in everyone, in front of everyone's mind when you may have left a facility?
So the enrichment roadmap is one aspect, but what we want to do is go into the whole reasoning behind enrichment as a whole, why it's useful, how you assess it, all that kind of thing. So once that understanding is there, then we hope that the desire to continue it is also there as well. And we have seen a lot of people get in touch with us and say, oh, hey, this is this thing that we've done because of this, we've gone through the steps, that kind of thing. But I often find with the people that I work with, the passion is there, but they sometimes do need some just that guidance to be able to go through it and then to really be able to understand the nuts and bolts of it. So I've worked with people in Vietnam, they get really excited about enrichment, but they're not questioning why they're doing it. They just want to do it because it's a fun activity for them as well as the animals and their activity levels. So to kind of ensure that longevity then is to help the people using that roadmap to understand the deeper meaning behind enrichment as a whole. You can also help them by putting together enrichment rotas and then using the roadmap as part of that to be able to highlight what times in the day might be good for enrichment, when you might need a rest time, when you might need to rotate, when you might need to clean your devices, all that kind of thing. So providing those opportunities and also inspiration. So when we worked in Vietnam with the help of Tan, we actually set up the Vietnamese Zookeepers Association Facebook page, and they were all sharing ideas of things that they created, and then somebody else wanted to copy that or change it up a little bit for their species and that kind of thing. So I think seeing people, and not necessarily kind of Western zoos, for example, bringing in these ideas, but actually people from your community, from within your country, implementing these ideas and sharing it within that community. And again, that removes that language barrier as well. So having all those opportunities, that can really help. But yeah, we have seen evidence of people saying, oh yeah, we've used this and it's been great, and this is what we've created from it. So it's been really nice to see that.
It's fantastic that you're getting such good feedback on the things that you're trying to implement. And the e-learning program you have is also exceptionally exciting for a lot of people. What do you have plans for other languages into the future, or do you see particular regions in the world which would benefit from that greatly?
Yeah, so as I said in the talk, Thai is scheduled for summer this year, providing that everything goes to plan. There is always something that crops up that tends to be difficult, but we usually do manage to get them out, usually about twice a year. Elliot, I know that you know that after this period when we launched Thai, we're actually hoping for a bit of a reboot. We're going to look at some of the information within the learning program, or actually take on board the difficulties within rescue centers and sanctuaries, because they're not addressed as much within certain modules. So for example, we do have a zoos in the 21st century module. We'd actually like to encompass all captive animals within that, all facilities. So we're actually going to look at rebooting some of that information. After that, we do have Hindi, and we do already have funding for Hindi in 2024. And beyond that, we are currently searching for funding for further languages. We obviously do a lot of work in Asia, so we have been prioritizing some of the languages where we do have connections and facilities that really need it, and we can share that within those facilities, which has been great. But we do also do work in Brazil, so we're looking at potential Portuguese. And then also in terms of identifying languages, we want it to obviously have the biggest impact on humans and animals as possible. So we are currently at the moment looking at the wider spoken languages, so things like French and Spanish and that kind of thing, so we can ensure that maximum impact.
Brilliant. And Nick Field from Global Animal Welfare. Hi, Nick. Thank you for coming today. She said that through her programs, they encourage environmental enrichment as part of regular routine rather than just being an add-on at the end, which is very, very important.
Absolutely.
So we talked about before, sorry, let me get my words together. Science these days, as you mentioned also, Sarah, moves at a very rapid pace. There's a lot of developments and a lot of new things coming out. So some of these things some of these concepts are very complex for frontline workers. So do we focus on trying to reinforce the basics with frontline staff, such as keepers or even researchers in Anna's case, or do we try to adapt and keep people up to date with the latest animal welfare science or research techniques? Anna, what do you think? If that question made sense.
I guess a resource like Sarah's, where she has this downloadable information, if people can find a resource like that where they can be updated in a simple, easy way. I think as a researcher myself, it's really important to make an infographic of a paper I write if it's relevant for say a welfare issue or something important. I usually try to make my paper condensed into something very digestible and simple that could be shared on social media, can be printed, can be downloaded. I've been starting to do 2 to 3 minute videos of papers that I write, so people can listen to it, or they can put on closed caption where they don't want to read a very long paper. So I think as researchers, we have an obligation when we're doing work that's relevant to frontline workers to make it short and digestible as well as the long version. And then hopefully organizations like SARCs can get that information and make it available to a wider range of people as well.
Brilliant. We've got a nice little question now to slowly take us towards the end. For each of you, what is your favorite rescue release story or experience? Dr. Irhamna, what do you think? What was your favorite rescue or release story and experience?
Well, for me, because I witnessed it on myself, is the release of an eagle. Yeah, that would be my favorite because we really have rescued eagles at our facility in the past. And then secondly would be the orangutan. I mean, we previously have 7 orangutans in our place, and we all know that almost all orangutan rehab centers is fully occupied usually. So it's like a long queue before we kind of from Java sending them to Kalimantan. And yeah, probably that's the best thing, to be able to sending the orangutans back to their island, although still long step to release. Yeah, but.
And Inge, do you have any particularly favorite or memorable release stories or rescue stories?
Well, the success release stories are always favorite, for sure, 100%. The last one of the Calvin Leopard is one that's standing immensely high that we have released with the GPS tracker and is doing very well. That's amazing to know. But when you talk about rescue stories, and I think would be a sea lion that we rescued, and it was in a horrible state, and the moment it started singing again, that's something I'll never forget.
And Sarah, from your experience of going through Asia, what are some of the most memorable animals that you've happened to work with?
I'm actually going to say humans. I'm a massive animal person, obviously, but the humans I've met along the way, they are the ones that give me the most hope. As Wild Welfare, we work obviously as much with people as we do with animals. And I've met some incredible people during my time in Vietnam. Elliot, I met you, which was wonderful. And you just meet these wonderful, inspiring, dedicated people who, yeah, we sometimes do go through, as we touched on earlier, these dark patches with mental health and the things that we struggle with and we see. But ultimately, we don't get up with it. We don't give up. We are so determined. We get up every day and we go out and we do it. And some of the people that I've met, and you just think the world is such a better place, and the animals in the world are so lucky to have you, being their champion. And as Anna was saying, hopefully, we do have a few more champions of non-favorited species in the world. So some of the humans that I've met, they've definitely left a lasting impression on me, and even some of the best times that I've had during work, and you just look back and you look at those interactions and you think, yeah, this is someone who's taken in what we've said. So one of my favorite points from Vietnam was when I was living there was I was having a Google Translate conversation, as you do, with one of the keepers, and he typed in, I want my animals to have choice. And I actually broke down and cried when I read that, because it was such a strong, an incredible thing for him to say, and to know that he wanted, and for him to feel that passionately. And then I knew that he would be able to go on and make that change happen. And again, long after I'd left, he was making those changes happen. So yeah, the humans that I've met, as much as I love all the animals that I meet, and they are incredible species and we're so lucky to work with them, is the humans that keep me going. And I never thought, especially when I was younger, I never thought I'd say that, but it is very true.
And I think that's exceptionally touching. I think that's probably very touching for many of the people here on this call today. who work with animals very closely. And finally, Anna, do you have any wonderful release stories of success or rescues that are particularly memorable for you?
I try to go through a good and a bad one very quickly, because we have a lot of, going back to humans, a lot of people who come to work with animals, they don't want to do what we call socialisasi in Indonesia, where you go into the area, the village, and you say, this is why lorises should be here, the animals should be here. And so we found a perfect release site for the lorises. And the team at the time were really reluctant. They didn't want to waste their time on the people. They released the loris there. And the reason there weren't lorises there is they were really heavily hunted. And the loris was hunted within 48 hours. She was gone. And so it actually made me be able to say to my team, look how important it is that we work with the community, that that site could be amazing if we get the community on our side. And then the real success is our lady Zina, who was in my talk, who's now on her 3rd or 4th baby. So they only give birth to 1 baby a year. And so actually seeing her survive, get married to a really special guy, and then have these 3 babies, it's been amazing. So she's a real success story.
Oh, that's brilliant to finish off on. Does any of our participants